The cat probably won't stay if I do that, though, is the only problem.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Cats are notorious.
She's one of those cats that wants to be in the same room as you. She wants to know what's going on. She wants to be around. But the minute you get within about a foot of her, she's like, no, I'm going to this other part of the room. I want to be present. I don't want to be engaged.
So no cuddles from this cat. There's no lap time or...
So there is at about 6 in the morning, right before her food timer goes off to try to get me to get up earlier. She'll come just right on my chest. And then occasionally she's kind of jealous and she is not a big fan of my partner. So if my partner is on the couch with me, she'll come kind of shove her way into my lap to make my partner move over.
Basically, your cat's an ass.
Yeah, no, she is.
I asked if there's cuddle time, and both situations you described are just passive-aggressive.
Or aggressive-aggressive.
Or aggressive-aggressive. Yeah. There's nothing passive about it. So anyways, sounds like an average cat, if we're being honest. And I am a cat guy, so yeah. This is the show. We can go ahead and just get started. We're really happy to be joined by Sarah Pitney. I'm going to just shamelessly read from your website.
Okay.
A senior attorney at, I don't want to say it wrong.
No, it's Benach. So her family's Cuban, so you pronounce it like it's a Spanish word. Benach.
Okay. At Benach
Collopy
LLP. We have a producer. He can make it sound like I just read straight through that. We're really happy to be joined by Sarah Pitney, a senior attorney at Benach Collopy LLP. And you joined the firm after serving as an immigration attorney for 2 years in Miami, Florida. They have represented clients in various proceedings on both the detained and non-detained dockets before the immigration courts. So you do a lot of deportation defense, but also affirmative family stuff, right?
Yep, a little bit of everything.
What's your favorite thing to do?
LGBT asylum.
Work permits? What's your favorite work permit category?
It's a tough one.
A5. It's got to be A5 because that means you just won, right?
It is A5. A5 is great. I also like the A12 occasionally because you can't really go wrong with an A12 unless your client went out and got arrested a bunch of times and didn't tell you.
Right. I'm going to be upfront and just apologize if I mess up the pronouns. I'm an ally, all of that, and I also have no one in my life who uses they, them. And so I have no practice. I don't have the muscle memory. If I mess up, I apologize.
If it helps, you can think of me as a plural existing thing, or you can just address me and the cat at the same time.
Oh, that's great. Or what you could do is put on one of those TikTok filters. So there's like 10 of you. That would be easier. But anyways, so I just wanted a little disclaimer. So yeah, it's Pride Month, and we wanted to talk about some LGBTQ issues and how they intersect with the immigration world. And I was just telling Matthew that it's weird to think that when I started practicing, you couldn't even do a same-sex marriage I-130. And that might seem like, well, I must be really old, and I guess I kind of am, but that really wasn't that long ago.
It really wasn't. I was still clerking in my 3L year when Obergefell got decided. And I was in Florida and we didn't have gay marriage. And so we had gay couples from Florida fly up to New York, get married, and then come back to do their adjustment.
Right. And I think it's also interesting when we look at sort of our current climate that we not be complacent, because I think over the last few years, and maybe this is my own bias, but there was a sense that not that we'd arrived, but that certain rights had been achieved and that part's done and we're going to continue fighting for additional rights. And it seems like in the last year or so, what we've seen the GOP really try and drudge up sort of 1990s culture war rhetoric and issues. And I know in some corners of the world that stuff never went away. I'm not naive, but there is this effort to try and sort of mainstream that stuff in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. And so what's the best way to not be complacent, I guess, and to make sure that we're continuing to advocate for LGBTQ issues?
Oh, Lord. I mean, are we talking specifically in the sphere of immigration world? Are we talking more broad than that? What are you thinking here?
Well, yeah, let's start more broad for people who, want to make sure that we continue to push forward, right? And that we're not complacent.
So it's kind of a tough one, especially difficult for me because I'm an anarcho-socialist. And so like dealing with the state generally is kind of complicated for me because there are so many people who are going to tell you, get out there and vote for Democrats, vote for progressives. And I think that, sure, that's part of it because, we do live in a country. There's really no getting around the fact that we have a government. So in the meantime, yeah, you do have to make sure that you're out here supporting these candidates who are going to support queer people. But on a more local level, find your queer mutual aid groups, engage with them, see what the queer community in your area needs. And one thing that I think is particularly important is making sure that we're supporting trans people specifically, because there's so much focus on LGBT as a concept, putting us all together. And, we do all need those protections, but trans people especially are the ones that are really, really getting attacked right now. So looking into, like I said, LGBT mutual aid groups, affinity groups in your area, and figuring out how you can help local trans folks that may be in need.
Yeah, I think this thing has been, I'm kind of with Stephen in the fact that like, it seemed like, okay, well, we're moving in the right direction. And someone, a lot of people are trying to throw up that brake really quickly on everything that's going on. But in the realm of immigration, when we're making these cases, you have a client who's gay, a client who's trans or whatnot, and we're talking about these specific country conditions like that happen in Mexico or Jamaica or Guatemala or wherever. And it's getting harder because usually you're trying to contrast, right? We are so exceptional and great and free here. And of course, everyone's going to be protected here. And then, but my trans client from Mexico, boy, they're really going to have it hard here. And then all we have to do is read the news here and say, well, are we that far afield from some of these countries? And I don't think it's discouraging. It just gets kind of infuriating that, we're supposed to be this place where we're free and all that. And there are a lot of places that are. And, we're kind of a big country. And I think kind of movement is a little bit easier in this country. But I really see a backslide. And it's really disturbing to me. I have a lot of people in my life that are trans. And, I think this country, we suffer from self-delusion. Even those of us that are woke and all that, we suffer from a self-delusion that we are better than we actually are. So Sarah, when you're working on these types of cases, I know you do a lot of them, how do you kind of draw that internally, that internal conflict of, oh, X country is bad and it's going to be bad for my client, knowing like, my client's not going to do that great here. They're also in danger here. How do you deal with that? And as maybe an internal strife.
It's so hard. I honestly don't even know if I could tell you that I do deal with it. I think I maybe repress it more than anything. And in my head, it's kind of just this balance of like, well, it's a little bit easier, I guess, for me because the area that I'm in is so queer friendly. I'm here in Washington, D.C. Our area is very, very safe. Generally speaking, right? There's always incidents, but I have no fear walking down the street with my partner. I don't worry about my general safety here. And so I think that part of that is I'm able to sort of apply that to my clients. They are also here in DC, where it is relatively safe compared to other parts of the country. But, then some of them are like, hey, I'm thinking about moving to North Carolina. And I'm like, what if you didn't? What if you didn't?
Yeah, a lot of other places, they're like, what about Alabama? Yeah.
Keep going.
I have one transgender woman who, in the middle of her court case, moved to Iowa because she said she couldn't find a job around here and she went to go work at a meatpacking plant. And I was like, how's that going for you? And she was like, well, I legally changed my name and my gender, and so they don't have access to like my old ID to be able to like call me my dead name or anything. So most people are like begrudgingly respectful. And I was like, yes, that's okay.
Maybe she was trying to lay the groundwork for an asylum claim in another country.
Maybe.
She's like, I got to get to Spain. What do I do? Okay, I need to get persecuted here. Let's talk about the good and the bad in terms of what you see the sort of immigration system doing for the LGBTQ community. What are some of the positive outcomes that you're able to achieve in court and some of the success stories that you see?
I think that too is really location specific, right? Here in our courts in Arlington or in Baltimore, I joke that I could do a trans asylum with both hands tied behind my back and blindfolded and I could still win it. Because our judges here are fairly used to trans cases, they know the law, and especially with Northern Triangle cases, they're like, yeah, I've seen these country conditions, I know what's up. And so like those cases are simple. But then I hear these stories of people on the border who are like, I need a country conditions expert for gay men in El Salvador. And I'm like, what the heck for? But I'm hearing the border judges, Stewart, Charlotte, that, these judges are actually coming back and being like, you didn't provide enough evidence and there's some improvement of controlling security forces under Bukele. So your client's fine. And it's just kind of baffling to me, the idea that anyone could lose a trans asylum case, which is like not the attorney's fault ever, right? But the system being so variable in different parts of the country.
This is the first time that you've ever met Stephen, right?
I was gonna say, if you knew Matthew a little bit better, you wouldn't be so quick to say that it's never the attorney's fault.
Well, no, it is funny because regular listeners will understand, hopefully, that there is this huge disparity as far as treatment for immigrants from different immigration judges in different courts, and sometimes immigration judges in the same court. But I had one recently of a lesbian client from Mexico who presents male. I guess the colloquial would be like butch lesbian, but she's very male presenting. And the judge found that it was more likely than not that she would be tortured and persecuted for this if returned to Mexico. And then she also had a cancellation and removal case, and she's married. And so they testified, well, if my wife is deported to Mexico, I would have to go and be with her. And again, her wife is also a lesbian. And the judge said that the wife would not suffer extreme unusual hardship if returned. And I was just like, I just couldn't wrap my head around, like, one is going to be tortured and persecuted. The other one is going to be...
Presumably because she wasn't masculine enough in her presentation, or what was... there are other reasons why he got denied, but, it was just like in one person's head, there is this disparity, and it can be really frustrating. And Sarah, you're right. Like, you look at some cases, like, why would we possibly ever need an expert?
I've never used one, not ever.
And then you also wonder, even if you brought in the best expert, some of these judges aren't going to grant the cases, not because of the harm to the person, is because they just don't buy the whole, especially trans thing, right? And that's a real problem. And when people say, oh, we should make the courts independent, all these judges independent, it's like, really?
That will fix everything. Sarah, what kind of pushback do you get from DHS on these kinds of cases, or do you find that they're fairly easy to work with in general when it comes to these kinds of claims?
That's another widespread one. I've had like 2 or 3 in the llast year, actually. I'm thinking of one in particular, but I've had 2 or 3 in the last year where they stipulated to a grant on the record. They actually signed joint motions to grant without ever holding an individual. Like, we didn't even go. But then I have another one right now where I've got a trial attorney who is insisting on dismissal. And I'm like, no, it's a gay man from El Salvador. I am absolutely not agreeing to dismissal. And we had this big back and forth kind of aggressive email chain. And finally he was like, well, I'm filing this motion and I don't really give a shit what you think. And, I was like, fine, you do that. And we filed a 15-page opposition the next day being like, this is insane. My client's been waiting 5 years. We actually had to file a motion to even get an individual scheduled because he was off the docket for so long. He got married. He has a husband who's waiting to be able to do an I-730 for him. Like, No.
Have you had a ruling on that? Because we talked about this last week, that this whole, I'm getting a handful of these motions every week now, and without having any conversation beforehand with DHS about what's the relief look like, maybe we can agree to something, or zero conversation, just unilateral motions to dismiss. And out here, at least, there's some difference in how the judges are ruling, but they've sort of all fallen in line with the same boilerplate grant of the dismissal over our objection. So what's your experience with that?
So with this one, this actually just happened 2 days ago. He filed the motion 2 days ago, and I filed the opposition yesterday. So waiting on a decision for that, but we're going to follow up on Monday because his hearing is supposed to be a week from today.
Very frustrating. And the DHS, their position is basically, these are the ICE attorneys in immigration court, that he can just refile and start all over and relive his trauma for another 8 years while he waits for an interview with...
Well, who said anything about 8 years? Because the most recent stakeholder minutes are saying they can't even get to LIFO filings. So 8 years or 20, or maybe he'll still be pending when he dies.
Yeah, but at least he gets to stay. These are the kinds of things that they're saying, right? Well, isn't it better than a removal order? Yeah.
Sure, it's better than a removal order, but it's not better than the asylum that I'm going to win in 5 days.
Right. And it's been very frustrating. I had a really strong ARCG case out of Portland, and it was set for an individual. Everything had been prepped and everything, and they just filed a motion to dismiss. And I followed up with the attorney and said, what about stipulating? And they said, oh, well, I haven't looked at the file yet. Like, they hadn't even looked at it. And then she looked at it and got back to me the next day and just said no. She can reapply with the asylum.
And I might be able to, when they're doing this on cases that are just about to be heard, because you're not saving any docket space, right? Because the case is going to get decided, right? So, I mean, if you want to do it on cases that haven't even been set for individuals yet, I think you have more of an argument there, a better argument. But dismissing cases over the objection of the immigrant is just absolutely ridiculous. But I know there's probably no negatives, but what are some negative aspects that you see in the U.S. immigration system towards LGBT?
If it's all pretty much fine, we can just wrap it up with the positives.
I think Biden probably fixed it, but I mean...
Yeah, definitely.
We're hoping there's something.
Sure, we're definitely not still dealing with, trans detention or ICE attorneys insisting my clients aren't actually queer or anything like that. Those are probably my two biggest things that I really frickin' hate. So trans detention is a huge issue. And you have this problem of transgender people come to the United States. And these ICE prisons split everybody up by gender. You're either going to be with the female population or the male population. Well, our transgender clients aren't able to legally transition in their countries, most of them. So all of their documents have their birth name and gender, and they're going to get put in population with their birth name and gender. But they're trans, so they're going to continue being persecuted while in general population, which means that usually one of two things happens. They either put them in solitary, which obviously is horrible for anyone's mental health, or they ship them off to the trans pod in Cibola, which is, I don't remember if that's New Mexico or Arizona. It's somewhere in the middle of the frickin' desert, which then prevents access to counsel, and they have to do remote court. It really screws trans people over. So, they're already running from horrifying persecution. The things that I hear from my trans siblings is just really turns my stomach. And then they get here and they're being held with the same people who would have done them harm in their home countries. And, that's not to say that every single person being held in ICE custody is going to murder a trans person, because of course not. But especially for trans women, you can kind of see what the problem is here. And God forbid they just parole them in, right? That they put them, I mean, to hell with an ankle monitor, but put them on a friggin' ankle monitor. There's no reason that trans people should be held in detention. I mean, more specifically, we should abolish prisons. But if you gotta have them, trans people are not the population that should be being held. The danger to trans people in general population, or you have to then deal with the mental repercussions of solitary, or getting shipped off to the trans pod and not having a lawyer and having a more difficult time in court, and it's just everything that comes with that. So I think that's probably my first and biggest issue that I always come into. And then my other one is ICE attorneys not believing that clients are queer, forcing clients to do a dance to show who they are. One example I had a gay man from Serbia, and there had been sort of a slew of Eastern European gay male cases, and they started thinking they were all fraud. And so my Serbian client comes in, we present his whole case, horrific past persecution in Serbia, and the judge is ready to grant. And she turns to ICE and, how do you feel about this? Why do you have to do that? ICE goes, Your Honor, we're not really sure whether he's actually a member of the proposed PSG. And I was like,
not gay enough.
Why on earth would anyone call themselves queer if they're not queer? This is not a fun thing to be like.
I don't mean to be critical, but I'm gonna just stop you here. Did you have your client sing any show tunes?
I did not.
You're gonna want
was out of me.
You're gonna want to get that on the record.
That's true.
Years ago in Miami, I had a client from Cuba, and he was gay, and he was every stereotype of a gay man that you could have. I think he probably would have been too gay to be in the movie Birdcage.
Oh my God.
And he just he was like floating around court. And as we're leaving, we had like a conference hearing, and we're getting set for the individual, and the judge, he said, Mr. Archimo, I want you to please introduce evidence onto the record to like demonstrate that your client is actually gay. And I'm just like staring at him. I'm like, okay. I didn't really know what to say. And as we're leaving, my client looked at me. He's like, didn't he see me? And I'm like, he saw you. He goes, oh, I had pictures. I go, listen, we'll deal with it a different way. Don't worry about it. I mean, you're right, Sarah. I mean, like, testimony enough, right? That is enough. Do you find the person credible? But
right, credible, consistent testimony should be sufficient. And instead, in this guy's case, because none of his ex-boyfriends would cooperate, I had to get 3 of his best friends in and then grill them on, did you ever meet his ex-boyfriend? And my guy was like, do you want some Grindr screenshots? And I was like, do you have any that are PG-13? He did. So we actually turned in some Grindr screenshots as well. And I was like, this is insane that I have to like turn in your dating profile for this judge to believe that you're gay. The ICE attorney, the judge was going to grant it.
Matthew had a case maybe a year or two ago where the ICE attorney was filing, this is a Mexican, I think it was like a gay male case and from Mexico. And the ICE attorney submitted a bunch of like blog posts from Mexican resorts about gaycations and how once you get to our resort, super low likelihood that you'll be murdered. It's like really pretty safe here for you. And this was the evidence. And again, it wasn't like a New York Times article about how conditions have really improved across Mexico. These were like gaycation.com/Mexico/resort discount code, whatever.
Right.
And it is interesting that we just had an article or some news break about the extent to which DHS is spying on immigrants. It's a multi-billion-dollar agency. They have access to all kinds of government experts and things like that. And not to mention all the data that they've scooped up from our clients. And yet they go to court and just sort of wonder out loud if somebody's really gay or file this kind of evidence, quote unquote.
Well, that's eternal relocation. They could just go live at the resort and everything would be fine.
Right.
Well, so shout out to the judge who tossed that evidence. She's like, I'm not even going to consider it. It's like not even worthy of me even like giving it diminished weight. So, shout out to her, but it was just like so ridiculous. And it was like, okay. But yeah, though, Sarah, I mean, you're obviously have had great success and probably 1, you're a great lawyer and 2, you're in a favorable jurisdiction. But like it is when you get a judge who's not that great and you have this case and you're like, it's obvious to any rational person. And you see that the judge just doesn't like your client because of who they are. And then the DHS attorney, that is really, I've only had to deal with that a few times, but that is really really frustrating because asylum law sucks. And it's not that difficult to deny a person. Even the best presented case, they could find lack of credibility or they can always find something. And especially if you have detained people, it's even more devastating because you can have a really decision that you can win on appeal, but that person stays inside for maybe years. So glad that we have people like you, Sarah, out there presenting these cases and probably in a very persuasive manner. So you ever think about like going down to the border and trying to fight those guys?
So what we like to do is we like to go down and take detained cases at the border, get them out, and then make them move up here. Yeah, we've done that for a couple. We actually just won one like that last month where Ava had met her when she was down in Tijuana and got her across, and then they had her in detention and they had her at Cibola, and Ava took it on and filed the 589 and did the bond and got her out. And she was like, okay, now you're going to come live here. That's the deal.
When Greg Abbott was owning the libs by busing immigrants to Washington, D.C., did that really break your heart?
Yes, I was so disappointed that, all of these people would have a fair chance in court. How horrible.
Yeah, please don't stop.
Oh, no.
Real quick, and we're running out of time because I have the cheap version of Zoom, but I asked earlier about being an advocate sort of more generally, but when it comes to your colleagues and our colleagues and other attorneys, what are some things that you think that we could do either different or better when it comes to representing the LGBTQ community?
So a couple of things that you can do to start off to create a more welcoming space just within your practice is pronouns. Ask for your client's pronouns on your intake questionnaire and ask for a preferred name. Especially with trans clients, they're going to write you their legal name, but they may want to be called something totally different. So our questionnaire starts off with, what's your legal name? What do you want us to call you? And what are your pronouns? Also, pronouns and signature lines, although don't make that mandatory in your firm. You may have trans people who are not out yet who may actually find that really intimidating and kind of aggressive, but add your own. Even if you are a cisgender person, you're not trans, put your pronouns in your signature line, because that is a big green flag for trans people that this is a place where, I'm going to be respected. So that's one. The other thing I would say is if you get a trans or queer person and you want to help them and you don't know what you're doing, reach out for mentorship. I actually sort of unofficially mentor all kinds of people because I'll get cold calls and cold emails of people being like, hello, I have my first trans client and I don't know how to call them. And I'm like, did you ask them how do they want to be called?
Right.
So, but there's mentorship available within our space. Honestly, people are always welcome to email me. I'll help out. There are great resources with like the Transgender Law Center, Immigration Equality. So there's definitely stuff out there. If you don't know what you're doing, don't just dive into it. Talk to colleagues about how can I be respectful to my client? What's the best way I can present this case? And, dealing specifically with queer trauma issues, because they're going to be different than things that other people may have experienced. One
thing I run into occasionally is, especially for a person who's not out, or I just had this the other day, a kid from Nicaragua. So a positive thing, he was an MPP. And so I was asking about MPP, and we had kind of done the whole consultation, and he had been in some student groups, protesting against the government. That was the genesis of his fear. And so he had been an MPP and they let him out. So I was just curiously asking him about MPP. He said, yeah, once they found out I was gay, they let me out of MPP. I'm like, what? What was that? I'm like,
you're what now?
and so it wasn't a question that I had normally put in. I asked about the fear and all that. And is that something that so someone who is not presenting the problem with, say, I'm afraid to go back to my country because of these political reasons or some family reason or some stuff, do you always ask every client that you have, if they're gay or in that lines?
To an extent, yes. I don't usually ask it directly. I start almost all of my consultations by violently outing myself. Hi, I'm Sarah. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a non-binary person, which means I don't consider myself male or female. I'm also pansexual, which means that I don't care what a person's body or gender is. And so I will start consultations like that almost all the time. And so that sort of opens it up for if there has been past persecution because of an LGBT identity, they're more likely to share it with me. But I'll also go through, our questionnaire asks about, are you married? What's your civil status? What's your spouse's status? And so I'll go through, and if I see that like information is missing there, I'll be like, oh, I see you're not married. Do you have a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a partner? Depending on your relationship, that can help you establish a claim. If there are any past relationships that you may have had problems because of, kind of giving them openers to be able to share that with me a little bit without being straight up like, yo, so do you like dudes?
Scale of 1 to 10, how gay would you say you are?
Have you heard of the Kinsey scale? Where do you fall on that? There are no perfect 0s, 3s, or 6s. I
do have a colleague in Seattle who had a sort of one of these not so great Mexican asylum claims, fear of general violence, that sort of thing. And I don't know if it was a situation where a judge's, intuition kicked in and he had a suspicion, or I don't know how it came up, but one of the children was testifying. And I think the judge just asked, are you gay? And he said, yes. And suddenly this case where that was not an issue that had been prepared like at all. And the judge flipped around and granted the case for the whole family. So I do think, I love what you're talking about, the way of sort of breaching it without being so straightforward. But I do think, because it's easy when you're doing an asylum claim to just talk to the mom or the dad over and over and over again. And meanwhile, there's a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, even at, however old they are, writer sort of in the background. And at some point, finding the way to breach that topic, I think is really important.
So with parents, I sort of have had that similar thing. I'll ask them, because it's hard to get the kid on their own. So I'll ask parents, has your kid ever been harmed for any reasons other than what you went through? Is there anything that makes your kid different? Because parents know. They want to pretend like it's not real. But if you say, if your child has been harmed for other reasons, if there's anything else that your child is afraid of that could make your claim stronger, so let's talk about that. And yeah, kids are cute because they always kind of think like, oh, my parents don't know. Your parents know. They might not know exactly what it is. They might not have it spot on, but they know. When I finally brought my mom around to being on board with who I am, I eventually got her to talk to me a little bit, and she goes, yeah, I knew since you were like 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we should probably wrap it up, but thanks, Sarah, for coming on, and it's been great, and happy Pride Month. Stephen thought Pride Month, he was wearing his Portland Trailblazers jersey because he thought it was about pride of your team. I had to explain to him, but now he knows.
That's not true. Sorry for the abrupt end. Like I said, we have the cheap version of Zoom, so it's about to kick us off. But we really, really appreciate your time. And honestly, I've taken a lot from this conversation, so I will apply it to my practice.
Yeah, you got my email now, so feel free to reach out.
I'll do that.
Go Phils. Tell Levi I said that.
I will not.
All right. Take care, guys.
All right. Happy weekend, y'all.
You too.
Bye.